Hello, my name is Karen McGuire. I am the CEO and co-founder of BioMendics LLC. Yeah, this is actually a really good question. I'm actually speaking to you from the Debra Cares conference in Los Angeles right now. And over the past few days, we've really had the opportunity to meet patients, families, clinicians, researchers. And one thing that's really stood out to me is, we're at a turning point, I think, for the EBS community. So if we're asking like in terms of why haven't there been very many new therapeutic options for EBS, from a scientific perspective, um, conditions like dystrophic EB or junctional EB, I think in the early days represented more straightforward targets for early gene therapies, right? So for recessive dystrophic EB, for example, those patients have a biallelic mutation for the collagen 7A1 gene, right? And this results in almost little to no functional collagen in the dermis, right? And so that meant that, replacing that protein became really the goal, right? So this made it an easier target for where we currently are in gene therapy. So in the case of EB simplex, right? Just EB simplex, we say simplex is not simple. There's nothing simple about it, including the genes, right? So we have patients that have autosomal dominant genetic mutations in keratin 5 or 14, but the location of those gene mutations can vary, quite a bit within those alleles. There are other genes associated with the condition as well, PLEC gene, KLH mutations, etc. So, but for EBS patients, we'll stick with the autosomal dominant, right? The keratin 5 and keratin 14 proteins. We're not missing protein, they're producing protein, but they basically are making both a normal protein as well as a pathologic variant or a mutated version of that protein. So instead, what we get is a mix, right? We get a mix of the good keratin and the bad keratin, right? And so the result is that the intermediate filament networks, they're the major structural proteins in the basal keratinocytes. Those become really weak and fragile. And that becomes the basis for really recurrent blistering in those patients. So I think because of those biological differences, it made it a much more challenging target for gene therapy. But that said, the advances in dystrophic EB have been incredibly important for changing kind of the overall landscape of how we view EB therapies. So another thing that makes it difficult is that many people living with EBS, they've essentially learned to manage their disease on their own, right? So because EBS is often inherited, families, they develop routines around wound care, footwear, how they're going to handle the daily activities of living. And over time, many of them stop seeing their dermatologist. They've kind of been told, well, there's not really any new treatment options available. Or they've, simply come to believe that blistering is something they have to live with. So this creates another challenge, right? So I think there's a lot of dermatologists out there that probably have more patients with EBS in their communities than they realize. And they may not appreciate how those patients' diseases will change over time, right? It's definitely more severe in our pediatric patients than it is in the adult patient populations. From a drug development perspective, we've seen that it can be difficult to locate, to connect with patients, especially if they're not actively involved seeing their dermatologist or they're part of organizations like Debra of America, it becomes harder for us to connect with them and be able to let them know about clinical trials, education, emerging therapies, all of these. So with all of that said, I want to end on a very positive note, which is that this year's Debra Care Conference, we saw significantly more interest and engagement from the EBS community. There were more sessions focused on EBS this year than ever before. We had over 50 families in attendance, which is an amazing number for a rare disease community. And that tells me patients are asking the important questions. What do some of these new advances in EB mean for me? What's going on? I want to learn more, right? So my message to, patients and clinicians is I think it's time to reconnect, right? The science is moving quickly, staying connected to your dermatologist, to the EB community. It really helps ensure, patients don't miss out on opportunities, really to learn about new research and future treatment options.